So I just ran into you in the hall. Who are you?
Steve Swartz. I'm the PM architect on Indigo.
That means you're a really smart dude.
Oh, absolutely. All of us Indigo guys. The smartest.
And you work right down the hall from Don Box, and
it's great. A great honor to work down the hall from Don Box.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And now I'm trying to find this talk that you were just asking about.
You give a talk at what, VS Live during the Indigo Day?
Yeah, at the very last. Yeah, I was actually the exact last. The company had a bunch of talks that we gave in our booth area for a half hour on a monitor.
Right.
And I gave one. It was amusing because I'm sitting in the speaker lounge and about 24 people. Everybody was talking about service-oriented architectures and what is it. And I disagreed with just about everybody. They had all these funny ideas, and so I gave a talk called "What Isn't Service Orientation?" And there's so many things that I want to find this talk to, so that I won't even forget them all.
What's the first one while you're typing?
The first one, service orientation has nothing to do with late-bound programming. We have all these guys who love coding XML, right? They've got to be coding to the reader, figuring out what the thing is in their code. Whereas service orientation doesn't have anything to do with the programming model you use to deal with a message once it arrives. It has only to do with the specification of the model and the WSDL before you go. But how you code against it is just, you could do it. There's good practice. Late bound coding is good for some things, but it has nothing to do with.
It's interesting. You guys over in the Indigo team have a different taxonomy than a lot of people at other places in Microsoft.
Yeah, because it's not just in, it's out.
WSDL, very few other people talk about web services and WSDL, and go ahead.
Yeah, it's so here we go. What isn't? First off, service orientation is not a revolution. That's one of the things. Like, everybody is talking about it because it is the coolest thing in the world. Right. The way I think of it is, I started coding in the 70s. And so the first big revolution, or which wasn't really, was structured programming, right? Back when we were fighting against go-to statements and making sure you used if rather than no common blocks. And all of that was just dealing with coupling, right? It was a strategy for not having bad coupling. And, frankly, that has evolved into object orientation, to components, and then the service orientation.
Let me go see here.
Yep. Sure. It's all kind of like the next step. As the applications get more complicated, you need to worry about coupling in dimensions you didn't worry about before. Right. And service orientation is just the next of those steps. That's really all it is. It's saying, given that we're now building apps that want to span time, span vendors, we just need to come up with some rules that make it possible to build those kind of apps, or to do them straightforwardly.
Right. What were some of the other things?
Yeah, I'm looking here now. Right. So.
What isn't?
It's not about architecture. So one of the things we had is service orientation. People will say service orientation is about interior apps, or service orientation is about messaging. In fact, you can build pretty much any application architecture using service orientation, because service orientation is more about the mechanism for coupling modules. It's not about any particular module. And so, you'll go on and say, oh, is this here? Can you do? Suppose I want to do pub sub, but I want to do service orientation. It's a confusion.
Yeah.
Let's see here. One person came up to me at VS Live and said, well, I want to use a data warehouse, but if I distribute my data, then I have to have my data all separate and have a little service in front of it. I can't combine it in one single database. And again, service orientation has nothing to do with how you architect your data, whether it sits in a data warehouse or is scattered all about. All it's saying is wherever it is, it has to have an interface which is service oriented. It's not about any of that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another favorite thing is, well, I don't want to put all of my data in text. I'll never get any perf out of service orientation. Service orientation isn't about the particular standards we use, right? We'll be able to come up with a very efficient TCP binary standard for getting info sets around, and that'll be just as performant as anything else. Service orientation is just about using a standard. Right now, the text-oriented standards we use are aimed at sort of distributed apps where the speed of getting data over a wire isn't as important as the architecture of the app once it's there. And so we have those that's why we first standardized there. But over time, we'll come up with really fast and very high throughput, high bandwidth standards. The trick is only to get the standards right. So, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's see, I have a long list. The late bounding stuff, like some people will say, service orientation must be about contract first coding. So you've got to go and edit your XML WSDL, and we'll have all these arguments about that. Or service orientation is about not using types. You've got to use a reader. I was telling you about that. All of that stuff is kind of irrelevant. Where the contract comes from, how you code to it. Right. Again, it's just about the qualities of the interface. Naming your endpoints, being very explicit about the interfaces, and then describing them with the standard. All that other stuff is kind of about the product. Something that makes Indigo cool, but not. One of the things service orientation is XML in your face. We have all these people who love XML these days, and they're great fans. And in fact, no one loves it more than I. But most people who write service-oriented programs should never think of the fact that there's XML around. I don't want them to ever see an angle bracket. I want them to just be coding integers, strings, just like normal messages. They should be dealing with the CLR and CLR types, right? No angle brackets. I'm sort of the honorary foe of angle brackets on our team, the curmudgeon, old.
Do you and Gene Pioli have Jane Pioli, the inventor of XML? Do you have arm wrestling matches?
No, because I use Don as my proxy for those things. Right? So I harass him. He's inflicted this bane on us all because Don is always the person who's interested in the thing which is cool next year, right? Cutting edge and Don are R1. And I'm the kind of guy who, when object-oriented code came around, used to say, C is good enough. I don't need C++. And, I don't want to learn COM. I came here, the company I worked at before here, I just said, I don't ever want to learn COM. Sockets are good enough. And then I came and became a dev on the COM team. And so now, XML, blah, I don't even want to think about it. So they don't even take me over to those conferences because I will embarrass the rest of them.
Where did the word or the concept of SOA come from?
The history of that word. I'm trying to think of how far back it came from. I don't know. It's been around only for a few years, right?
Yeah.
I imagine what happened is that people started building web services, and then what they did was run into all sort of coupling problems, which are kind of unique at that distance. And then what happens is that once you have these standards like WSDL and XSD, so you can explicitly specify contract and schema in a language that's not your program, you suddenly start seeing that there's all sort of opportunities for decoupling at the beginning, the types used on both sides, that we had in ASMX, and the vendors, which we're getting now as we get the standards increasingly in place. But I don't know. That would be an interesting thing. I'll have to find out and let you know where it came from.
Cool. Any other, you had, 11 or 17?
I don't know. That's the last one right here.
7 of N.
Okay. App domain standards. Another thing that people think of service orientation as, the last one was, well, in my industry, I'm building shoes, and we have this set of schemas that I have to exchange if I'm exchanging shoe orders. Do I have to use those? It's kind of like someone saying, if I'm going to build a math program, do I have to have the add and subtract with the special signature? Again, using those standards is a cool thing. All of these things, data warehouse or not, those are all cool, wonderful things. They're just not service orientation. So service orientation has nothing to do with implementing web standards. Nothing to do with implementing app standards, the kind of higher level standards. It's just about making sure that whatever messages you're sending along, they conform to SOAP and WSDL and XSD, those kind of standards. It's those things that matter.
What's the best place for somebody who's just coming into this world to learn about it?
Well, Don wrote a bunch of web papers last year with, he had the 4 tenets of web services. And you can go out and if you Google that, you'll run into all sort of stuff where people blog because, these days you could probably not shake a stick through the blog sphere without running into a half a dozen people arguing about service orientation.
Yeah.
If you want to learn about Indigo, David Chappell just published a white paper on MSDN that talks about it. And we're going to ship Indigo in a few weeks, and at that point, you'll get, beginning of the flood of information from our team, white papers, presentations.
Yeah, I'm coming back to see you give a demo and talked to Steve
Malay.
Malay.
Steve
Yeah,
Malay.
that's right.
Yeah, all of the, we have, I think, 4 or 5 Steve architects on the team, so
Okay.
it's a heavily oversubscribed team, like service orientation.
Any good books out there?
I don't think so yet. I mean,
Not yet.
I have a pile of books over here on
Yeah.
service orientation, but I'm not sure I would recommend any one particular one. They tend to either be very specific to a product, you know, like service orientation and my software package, which you can buy, or they're very general, like service orientation for managers. And so I haven't run into one that is as cool, say, as Grady Luch on objects or Jordan on structured programming. That's a book that is waiting to be written.
Wow. Anything else we should know about SOA?
So thank you, and I just have to say how honored I am to be interviewed by you. It's one of the finest and most exciting moments in my life.
All right. It's nice to meet you too. All right, it's getting deep in here. With that, thanks.
You're welcome.